Hey guys, EDDBUD here with an initial review of the Nike Vaporfly Next % 2. Thanks for joining me today on the channel guys for an initial review of the Next % 2. This is the prototype edition which I managed to pick up from someone at retail price, so I'm really pleased about that. I took these out on an initial 8-mile run, 12.9 kilometers total, really aiming for my half marathon goal pace, though it's never quite so easy to do that after a hard day's work. So certainly an exciting new release from Nike. I believe these are dropping a little bit closer towards the end of March. I'm not quite so keen on some of the other colourways that are dropping, especially that blue and red one. That's not for me. I think you could probably refer to that one as the Joker colourway, the king of the running shoes. Have they made some improvements here in the second iteration? This weighs in at 242 grams or 8.5 ounces in my UK size 11.5. On the box it does state that this is a US 12.5. I think Nike sizing is a little different to that of Adidas, Hoka and New Balance. Just as a comparison, the Next % Ekiden edition, which I picked up last year, weighs in at 240 grams. So very, very slightly lighter than the new version. I mean, it's nothing really, is it? Does look like retail price on the Vaporfly Next % 2 is going to be 209 Earth credits. So they've managed to find a 30 Earth credit drop somewhere, or have Adidas convinced them to lower the price a little bit, considering that the Adizero Adios Pro is only 170 Earth credits. I'll let you figure that one out guys. So how do these hold up against the original version? Before we get to the main part of the video guys, it really helps the channel out if you hit that subscribe button and also click the bell below for notifications when I launch those new videos. And also help get us out there to more people by giving this video a thumbs up like. We'll start with the upper first. And actually we're going to talk about the upper quite a bit because that's where all the changes are. Don't let anybody lead you down the primrose path and suggest that there's anything majorly different about the midsole and the outsole here, because I think they're pretty much the same. So we've got a new upper material here on the Next % 2, and I have to say it is a big upgrade. Just a more natural feeling on foot. It's still flexible, but less of that plastic bag vibe. That really was quite evident on the Vaporweave upper of the Next %. I never really truly loved the upper on that shoe. It didn't really feel that natural to me. I think we've got an upper now that's somewhere between that featured on the Tempo Next % and the Atom Knit on the Alphafly. Although I'd suggest it's more flexible and softer than the upper material on both of those shoes. We've got the addition of that front toe box reinforcement. Keeps the material away from the toes. I mean, if I took the card out of here that I'm using to stuff the shoe, it kind of stays where it is, which is nice. But the actual upper feel here in the toe box is lovely and soft, glove-like. I just felt it kept the material away from my toes on my initial run, and my toes weren't being slammed and crushed up against the front of the upper. I did find that to be a bit of a problem with the Vaporweave material on both the Next % and the Zoomfly 3 actually. So that toe box reinforcement reaches right round to the final eyelets on the lateral side of the shoe and round to the first eyelets on the medial side. Nike haven't come up with some sort of fancy name for this upper material as far as I'm aware, so I guess it's up to me. I name it the suit of armour mesh. I've got to say that the upper does feel extremely similar to that of which I've reviewed on another shoe recently. That's the Reebok Energy 3. There's certain sections here that are too close for comfort, considering that this shoe can be bought for as little as about £50 at times. Go figure. Big change in the shoe from the initial version is the loss of the spaces between the eyelet chains here. They're now filled in, and you will see that Mrs. EDDBUD's sewing box has again been raided for some of those doily style laces. Nike have obviously been purchasing all of that material from Mrs. Muggins's fabric shop. Oh man, I miss those fabric shops. There's a certain comforting sort of vibe when you go into them. Long live Mrs. Muggins and her extensive ribbon selections and accurate length estimation. Is the lockdown any better with these laces? Well, they do seem to sort of lock into the eyelets a little bit better, but I can imagine that disappearing over time as you've kind of ground them through the holes a little bit. I'm not sure there's a massive improvement there, but we shall see. That wafer thin tongue has been exiled, and they've actually included a bit more padding up at the tail end of the tongue, just about where it meets the collar, and it does provide a little extra relief from the pressure of those laces. And of course, if you're going to wear them for a marathon, that's going to start to become a problem somewhere towards the end when your foot starts to expand out a little. The tongue's made from the same material as the upper, aside from obviously this more plasticky sort of style piece towards the collar end. The tongue's not held in with an awful lot of stitching, and I do remember people being a bit overzealous pulling on the tongues of their shoes. Just don't do that, guys. I can imagine someone, pulling that straight off there. It's just a small little bit of stitching there. You could always get your needle and thread out and reinforce it a bit more, I suppose. Relatively dry conditions on my first run, so can't really talk about moisture escaping properties of the upper, but it certainly felt nice and breathable. In terms of fit, I'd suggest it's similar to that of the Next Percent. I prefer a half size up in the original version of the Next Percent, and I don't think I'd want to go down half a size with this one. An 11.5 just seems perfect. Not too sure why they've included this extra flap of felt-like material here at the end. Answers on a postcard. Aside from this, top level upper upgrade fixing. They've got rid of the major issues by replacing the upper. Everything else remains the same, which is alright by me. I think it looks darn good as well. What do you reckon, guys? The swoosh onto the midsole reminds me of something as well. Remember this? It looks good. After my initial run, I'm going to give this a 2.9 out of 3 for the upper. Midsole now. Tried and tested Next Percent midsole here. ZoomX carbon plate, you know the score. I think its propulsive energy returning properties are world renowned, and I shan't wax lyrical for too long about it. Nike have chosen to leave that setup well alone here, and I think everybody will be rejoicing about that because it just works, doesn't it? That footbed is of course still very narrow, and that's liable to put off some people who have a wider foot. Also, if you have very low arch, then ain't gonna work for you. The foam is creased up like a bad suit, straight out of the box, and that's just how this foam is. I think anybody expecting a difference here will be disappointed. It's the same midsole. But that means effortless miles, certainly at half marathon goal pace, threshold pace. I put some Courtney Barnett on and just ran, and it was wonderful, especially after a hard work day. The stress just disappeared, and the day felt less like falling down and more like a carry-on film. Not really any equal to the midsole feel in this shoe. Well, I mean, some shoes are getting close, but there's still no equal. I'm going to give this a 3 out of 3 for midsole. It doesn't need to change. It's great. Outsole. No major changes here, no big revelations, nothing like that. It does what it says on the tin. 3-piece rubber setup here. We all know that the rubber here in the forefoot is quite soft. I got a stone embedded into the Ekiden pair the other day. It went right through to the carbon plate. In fact, I had to get some pliers to pull it out. That's how embedded it was. So do be careful if you're running on some gravelly areas. It could happen to you. Or I guess if you're near the trading estate, there's probably other stuff there like screws and bolts and things that you could get embedded into your ZoomX, and no one wants that. Grip is great on road and pavements, but don't even think about trying to run with these on grass. It's only gonna end in tears. I think on wet surfaces, these hold up pretty well. Certainly better than the 4%. That shoe was a slide fest really, unless it was dry. But I think there's still room for improvement in terms of the outsole rubber. Just wonder if they can make it a little more grippy. Can feel just a little smooth sometimes and doesn't provide the best of traction. I think a few of the other super shoes have got a little advantage over the Next Percent in terms of the outsole. I think after my initial run, I'll give this a 2.6 out of 3 for the outsole. I believe the Next Percent, when I reviewed it, I hadn't got my review system in place, so I think a 2.6 is reasonable. It's got it where it counts, but I think the exposed ZoomX here does make it a little bit liable to attack from rebellious rocks. Value now. So you've got to talk value on this one. They have reduced the price of the shoe down to 209 Earth credits. Now still a considerable amount. I think it brings it a little bit more in line perhaps with something like the Fuel Cell RC Elite, close to the Brooks offering, the Hyperion Elite 2, but I mean you're still a way off the Adidas Adizero Pro, and people are snapping those up like turtles whenever they appear online. Slight weight advantage I guess in the RC Elite, and outsole, well, serious grip. It's certainly a striking shoe though, and one perhaps that will propel you to some faster times once you harness its facets. I think reducing the shoe to 209 though does actually make the Alphafly somewhat less of a value offering. Really does put it out there on its own, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing considering there's so many pairs sat right now on the Nike store and other online retailers as well. You can bag a pair of those very easily. Makes you wonder with that shoe whether they've just elevated the cushioning so much that people just don't really need it. I have to make a video about that. Oh yeah, I already did. I think if you're looking for a super fast shoe to use for your half marathon or marathon efforts this year, it's hard to look too far away from the Next Percent 2. I think moving the price down a little bit makes it that bit more attractive. Though I do wonder what they're going to do with the other pairs of the Next Percent. How does that work? I'll give it a 2.5 out of 3 for value after my initial runs. I know it's going to wear down in that outsole. They've got a life expectancy, these shoes, and I'll use this one for racing this year. If I've totaled the scores up correctly, that gives us 11 out of 12 for the Nike Vaporfly Next Percent 2 prototype. Are you going to be picking up a pair of the Next Percent 2 when they drop later on this month? Let me know down in the comments. A quick musical interlude for you. I remember back in 2005 picking up this album by The Strokes, entitled First Impressions of Planet Earth. It's a really cool limited version where you can switch out the postcards there to the different members of the band. I think it's a bit overlooked, this album actually. People for some reason had got a bit bored of The Strokes. They weren't quite as hip and stuff, I suppose, as when they released their first couple of albums. But it's still a good album with some great tracks. You Only Live Once is a really good opener with some good intertwining guitar. Really nice production as well. Always this strange meeting of organic elements and the programmed feel of drum machines, even though it was played by an actual drummer. I think people got a bit freaked out because the Strokes kind of shifted style a little bit. Certainly with Juicebox, for example, the major part of the track was led by the bass guitar. And I think people were like, oh, I want more Strokes like the original stuff. But bands have to change, you know, if they just knock out the same thing every time, it's going to get boring. I really like Razorblade as well, some really interesting timing of that track. It's hard to kind of figure out at first. It kind of sways, almost feels like you're at sea. One track I love on this album is called On the Other Side. I just love the vocal delivery here from Julian Casablancas. Almost sounds at times a bit like a track of self-loathing, but I just love that vocal delivery. He's kind of sailing on top of the music. Electricityscape as well uses some new effects. You know, the Strokes had traditionally only used overdrive and a little hint of reverb here and there, but they're using some more elaborate effects on the guitars on that track. 15 minutes as well is really interesting in terms of the long stretched out tempo, and again with Casablanca's vocal just hanging over the top there. The vocals are a lot clearer actually on this album. You can understand all of the words and some really interesting content in there. So do go and check this one out from The Strokes from 2005. It's called First Impressions of Planet Earth. Hope you've enjoyed the video today, guys, and thanks for sticking with me to the very end. It really helps the channel out if you haven't done so already by hitting that subscribe button and clicking the bell for notifications so you get some when new videos are launched. And help get us to the toppermost of the poppermost by giving this video a thumbs up like and sharing it with your running buddies. My name's EDDBUD, and I'll be seeing you